Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Tuosto from Griffin Gaming Partners and Liontree. Thanks for joining us. This conversation will be with the CEO of Forte, Josh Williams. Thanks so much, Josh.
Hi, Nick. So nice to see you here. Thanks for having me today.
Well, let's dive right in. I know NFTs and blockchain and gaming are top of mind for lots of folks in the audience. Let's start with how would you best describe Forte to someone who's not familiar with the company?
Sure. Forte tries to make it easy for game developers of all stripes and sizes, be they the world's largest publishers to, indie game developers, to leverage blockchain technology to introduce real player ownership and player-to-player economies in games and unlock new revenue models and really tap into the potential that blockchain brings to games. And if you look at what's going on in the blockchain space, the technology's been developing and developing for a little over a decade now, and we're just kind of at I think the tipping point of starting to see some real consumer awareness and adoption of it. And I think more and more game developers are interested in sort of what sorts of game designs and revenue models the technology could unlock for their games and for their player communities. And so we've just been really excited the last few years to be building this out and started working with a bunch of great developers.
And on that same thread, how do you expect blockchain to really impact the gaming industry, and what role do you think blockchain will have for mass market gaming?
Yeah. I mean, I think, if you zoom way out and just sort of think from first principles and think about a player's first perspective, today the games industry is close to a $200 billion a year industry in terms of what players spend in games. And the majority of that is, as you know well, Nick, is driven by free to play games and in app purchases for digital content. But that more than $100 billion a year in app purchases and digital purchases of digital goods and virtual currencies is all driven from pure entertainment expenditures from a player's perspective. So if a player spends 10 or 50 or $100 in a game, they're spending that money to try to get cool stuff that they care about in the game, but they don't really own any of these virtual goods. So players spend a lot of time. They put a lot of their energy into games, and they spend a lot of money in games. And so, just fundamentally, the idea that players can truly own the goods that they purchase in games, and that those durable virtual goods can have real world value, that players can have agency in deciding, how they want to use the virtual goods inside of a game. Um, is just a fundamentally better proposition from a player's perspective. And it sort of turns these virtual goods in games into assets and not just expenditures. And so we think it will drive a fundamental shift in sort of what players care about, what players can do inside of games, and ultimately will open up new revenue models, new sources of value for publishers all around the world. And I think talking about this 3 years ago when we first started Forte, it seemed like sort of a pie in the sky idea. I think a year ago, people started to think, okay, there might be some possibility, in this space. I think today, increasingly, it's not all the way there yet, but increasingly, people are starting to see what's really possible with the idea of players truly owning goods and blockchains being the source of truth for real ownership for users of virtual goods and virtual currencies, and you're starting to see how that could play forward in games.
One of the reasons we at Griffin decided to lead the investment in your Series A, the largest investment we've made at Griffin to date, was really our appreciation for what developers were looking for, and specifically coming to Forte for. But I think it'd be helpful for the audience just to hear why did developers come to Forte to work with you around a blockchain gaming project?
Yeah, well, I think from a developer's perspective today, um, if you're interested in looking at blockchain technology, you're interested in introducing player ownership and the idea of a player-to-player economy, ways to enable your community to really own assets in your game, maybe own a part of the game's economy overall, and you're interested in exploring these designs. There's just a really tough set of challenges and problems to figure out in evaluating the blockchain technology landscape. Which blockchains to use, how to make scalability work, how to provide a great user experience. So just working with the technology presents a number of challenges, and it's still a nascent space. So working with the technology is hard, and I think developers come to us to sort of make that easier on one hand, but also to give them much more flexibility and interoperability and really future proofing when it comes to the idea of introducing their players to blockchain technologies and token assets. So we provide sort of a cross-chain, multi-chain interoperable system that really gives publishers and developers freedom of choice in terms of what blockchains they want to support and how they want to support their players and their communities going forward. So that's one big thing. I think the other big thing is for player experience. If you go try to buy cryptocurrencies or NFTs today, generally it's a really difficult experience. It's not what game players are accustomed to. So we spent the last 3.5 years sort of building technology to make the player experience really smooth and seamless. We have a wallet and a platform that developers can integrate just by using a set of RESTful APIs, and then they can have an embedded wallet that's white label, sits directly inside of a game, and lets players purchase token currencies, token assets, including NFTs, and use those in game in the same way that they purchase virtual currencies and virtual goods in games today. So that's the second thing I think is the player experience and just delivering an experience that players are used to in games today. And the third thing is crypto is incredibly complicated and fraught in many ways. Playing field from the perspective of regulations, both with securities and taxes and money transmittal issues in the U.S. and all around the world. And games today, as you know well, Nick, are global. They're a global phenomenon. Players from all around the world. Games interconnect people from around the globe. And if players own real value inside of games and they can trade with each other, they can trade goods and services with each other, you're sending value throughout the sort of global economy, and that constitutes in many jurisdictions a regulated activity for value transmission or money transmission. So they come to us for kind of our expertise and all the tools we've built out to support compliance, which is really important for big businesses and publishers that want to embrace blockchain technology and leverage it to benefit players and to open up new revenue streams for themselves. But obviously, they don't want to put their player communities at risk. They don't want to jeopardize, their business or their brands. So it's really those three things that are, I think, important to every developer that looks seriously at the blockchain space.
I think there are probably lots of talented development teams in the audience here, sort of wondering as they watch things like Axie Infinity just explode and the momentum with SoRare. How does one build crypto expertise within an organization? If they've got a great idea for a game they think lends itself well to blockchain gaming, how do they start to sort of beef up in those capabilities that might be less natural?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. And this will be a process that sort of occurs over time. It is another thing, kind of a fourth thing that developers come to us for today, just since we've been working on this for years now. But I think just like we saw in the transition from sort of the retail boxed, upfront purchase model to the beginnings of kind of downloadable content and subscription models and on into free to play and in-app purchase models today, there was a lot of game design experimentation, a lot of economy design and experimentation that happened in games throughout the world, starting 15 years or so ago when free to play really started to take off in the East and then transitioned into the West. And so I think we'll see a very similar sort of pattern here where already you can see just like we did in the transition to free to play, kind of smaller upstarts, a lot of them being sort of crypto native or blockchain native developers experimenting with what might be possible in games or game-like applications. You see, a mix of smaller developers who are excited by the technology and what it could offer to them and to their players, who are starting to think about, ways they can incorporate it into their game designs and economies. And now we're starting to see big publishers really, think about what's possible here. So I think there'll sort of be a similar learning process. And what we recommend developers do is to really think deeply about, their player community, what players naturally do today in terms of, what they request in terms of being able to trade with each other, what sorts of value players contribute to the game, whether that be content they create, players and friends they help draw in, social communities they create, and then really think about how could you reward players for those valuable contributions that they're bringing to the game, and what sorts of goods and services could you design that wouldn't necessarily displace the way that you monetize in an existing game today. You can still continue to sell in-app purchases and sort of merchandise goods, but what supplemental sorts of virtual goods and currencies could you introduce that players could really own and could trade with each other to generate new revenue streams for you and possibly income streams for players. And so, we recommend developers really start to think about that. And certainly we help developers sort of study up on token economics and, what has worked and what hasn't worked in the space of the blockchain ecosystem to date and some of the cool stuff we see in general with game developers too.
I mean, that actually touches on one of the most interesting dilemma that I see for developers who become expert in free to play economy design, balancing the economy such that the player feels a real sense for the value of virtual goods and currencies. How do you recommend that developers create that same sense of balance when you've now got a market dynamic which can take the value of assets to the moon, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, that's where being really thoughtful about the game design and the economy design is really important. And we recommend actually that developers really carefully design sort of counterbalancing mechanisms into their economic systems, so that actually it's a bad player experience if prices are really volatile or prices change dramatically. Something that is a common commodity in the game suddenly becomes expensive because there's speculative interest in the good. And so we work with developers really closely actually to design sustainable economies, sustainable token models that actually eschew a lot of that sort of those dynamics around volatility, and really focus on players and actually disallow sort of speculative activity. And we think that's a really good way to bootstrap and start a player-to-player economy that happens to use blockchains to really secure the property rights for the virtual assets and games, but sort of doesn't play into some of the crazier stuff that happens in the market in general with respect to speculation today. So to us, that's really important. We want to work with developers that are oriented toward building long-term economies, sort of not playing into just whatever is sort of in the headlines in the news today, because we think player communities eventually will win over time in sustainable game designs that really put players first and foremost. Win over time, and we'll create massive new value streams that frankly can just dwarf the size of the games industry sort of as it stands today, if it's really done right, and then can be sustainable, not just sort of pop and then fall off. And so that's what we're interested in working with developers on.
And taking a sort of zoomed out perspective on the overall market, do you think this transition to blockchain gaming threatens the in-app purchase TAM? If this is $100 billion market, is it something that adds to that 100 billion or really comes at the expense of it?
Yeah, I think it definitely adds to the sort of TAM. I think players can always make expenditures in games, and developers can continue to merchandise goods. If you think about what's possible in a token economy, you're actually taking a superset of the revenue models and really the game designs that are possible. You can always have goods that are, maybe not tradable, that are just consumable, or that a player, owns in their own account, and you can design your game around some of those goods. But with the idea of real property rights and sort of a market economy where players can trade goods and services with each other in a game, you expand what's possible beyond sort of merely merchandising things. So, additively, you can start to do things like introduce classes of goods or gameplay loops in the game that involve goods or assets that players can own and trade with each other, freely. You as a developer can monetize those in a number of ways. You could monetize the trades every time there's a transaction between players. You could monetize the supply base of the tokens that you have sort of in reserve, and introduce effectively, a monetary policy with inflationary rewards and interest rates and the like, and derive, income not only for merchandise and goods, the way that developers do today, but actually start to be more like, a little country with your millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of players, with an economy that's encapsulated, that includes your players and your community in and around the game. And you can operate more like a central bank, that can set fiscal policies, monetary policies, and derive a number of revenue streams from it. In addition to continuing to merchandise goods or sell IAPs in the same way that you do today, if that's what you want to do.
This is interesting. This might be one of the few areas where we have a difference of opinion. My personal view on this is that it could end up being much more threatening to traditional free-to-play game makers. Because I look at sort of the way that most games, especially in mobile, scale. It's really an exercise of maximizing LTV so you can spend on marketing to reach users. And the initial results from some games that look very similar to their free-to-play equivalents is that the LTVs are radically higher. In some cases,
Yeah.
orders of magnitude higher when blockchain is integrated, which may just mean that there's a lot more capability to market the games, that aren't viral, the ones that depend on user acquisition to scale. And those arrows may end up blocking out the sun, frankly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. When developers really embrace this stuff, I think my point is you can continue to sort of merchandise goods, but I do think the size of the market opportunity around players really owning goods will be much larger. And it's the logic is simple. If you're willing to spend $10 in a game today and it's just cash you're taking out of your pocket on a pure expenditure, right? That's one thing. But if you truly own the good in the game, and there's sort of a market economy around the goods that you own in the game, that you could sell it if you want to, and maybe recoup part of your purchase price, maybe get the whole purchase price back. Maybe if you put some time and effort into the goods that you bought and sort of leveled them up or made them more rare or transformed them, they could actually be more valuable, and you could sort of make a profit off of the your time in the game and sort of your skill in the game and your collaboration with other players. Then you'll probably be willing to spend much more than $10. And so I think that's part of what people will realize more and more as time goes on here.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And, I'm sort of colored by, all the fast follower examples in mobile. There's so many games that look very close to the player, and whichever player ends up being reached by the advertisement that gets them to install, the app tends to, capture that player if it's a compelling product. And this is across a huge population of players. So you're only talking about, sort of the numbers. And I can
Yeah.
see higher LTVs just being a dramatic competitive advantage in the end game.
Yes.
But today, there are all these new creative exercises. Like there's no comp to, Axie Infinity that looks, very similar but isn't based on blockchain. I mean, sort of
Right.
thinking through the implications for AAA gaming. I mean, there's this moment where there's this tremendous appetite from players for all things blockchain gaming. Do you think that the next generation of AAA hits will be produced by the big publishers that already own and operate those games today, or by upstarts who have come up with a new idea for something in the AAA arena? They spend the 2, 3, 4 years to develop something at scale, based from the ground up on blockchain.
It's a great question, and I'm excited to see what happens. I think there'll be a mix of both, actually. I think we'll definitely see some upstarts that really understand blockchain technology and token economies and sort of learn game development as they go. But I think games are very difficult to develop. I think they're difficult to grow and scale and really make work for a global audience. So it's a long pull there. And by the same sort of token, no pun intended, I think we'll see big publishers also, really dig into how blockchain technology works, how token economies can work, how they can embrace it to empower their communities. And to your point, Nick, with respect to LTVs and user acquisition and the like, in mobile and elsewhere, if you start to think about what's possible and token economies where players have a stake in the game's economy as a whole, you can do really interesting things like when players form social groups or maybe recruit a new member into a guild or a clan, and that player that they recruited contributes, to the guild or to the group, and the group, owns goods that maybe it picks up from, let's say, defeating a boss in a raid. You can share value out with all the players in a guild, and that sort of actually lets you put together maybe recruiting programs, for guilds and for clans. If you think about streamers and sort of all of the community around games, not just inside of games today. The idea that you can have assets that have real value and give streamers ways to participate in, really deeply in these game economies that will emerge over time. I think we'll see a mix of really creative models from like new upstarts that really try to figure all this stuff out from scratch, and from existing developers and major publishers who have franchises with a lot of value, player communities of tens of millions or hundreds of millions of players, and really smart people who, frankly, in a lot of cases, are looking for something new from a game design and sort of passion perspective, when it comes to the games that they produce and the ways that ultimately the games are monetized. Because, as you've heard from many developers and designers, it becomes a grind, I think, to sort of figure out how to just maximize LTVs in a free to play economy, when you've got a small percentage of the audience, typically less than 5%, that spends much of anything in the game, and a really small percentage of the audience, less than 1%, that you really rely on to drive the vast majority of your revenue. And it really kind of boxes you in as a designer, in terms of the sorts of games you can produce. So I think this is sort of a freeing thing for designers. And I bet we'll see a lot of, big publishers and game teams get excited about that.
Yeah, fascinating to think through whether this relieves some of the pressure for this obsessive focus on LTV that was required in scaling free to play games historically. One of
Mm-hmm.
the things that was really important to our investment thesis around our belief in Forte was your focus on regulatory compliance, and enabling that as a product essentially for your customers. It'd be helpful, I think, for the audience to hear just your view on the latest in terms of regulation around crypto in gaming in particular.
Yeah, yeah. I think starting about 3.5 years ago, we really thought, look, if blockchain technology can truly create a fundamental shift in the value proposition for consumer goods and services in general, and games specifically, then it's got massive potential. And if it does have massive potential, then governments are going to care about it at some point. Businesses that are established, that already have billions of dollars in revenue, and again, tens of billions or hundreds of millions of players and franchises that are really valuable. They're going to need to know that embracing the technology and enabling players to own things, trade goods and services with each other, that can be done in a safe, secure, and compliant fashion. And that can be done also without compromising sort of the fundamental precepts of what blockchain enables, which is real self-sovereignty, like true property rights and ownership for players, in a really trust minimized fashion. So we set out about 3.5 years ago um, to start working on engaging with regulators and acquiring our licenses to enable these sorts of player-to-player economies, community economies in games, where players own things and can trade things with each other, but where the creators involved, be those the developers and publishers, or the streamers, or the sort of user-generated content creators and modders around the world, can sort of know that the economy they're participating in is legitimate. It's compliant with the laws and regulations all around the world, but it still, leverages underlying blockchain technology, and gives players real property rights and true ownership. And so, finding that balance, and creating the tools and services to enable the best of both worlds has been a long journey. I think it's something we really uniquely have done from the early days in the space.
Speaking of business model disruption, it'd be also interesting, I think, for our audience to hear how your equity-free developer fund works. As someone who invests from a traditional fund that does so in exchange for a percentage ownership of the company, this is sort of a fascinating piece of the crypto market in that you'll give developers grants without requiring equity in exchange. I think a
Yeah.
flavor for how it works specifically would be useful for them.
Yeah, for sure. We're really careful about how we do this, and as I said, we really want to align with developers that think long term and put players first, and want to leverage the underlying blockchain technology kind of from a first principles perspective about how it could better enable games and game economies, and create bigger, more thriving game ecosystems. But when we find a developer like that, yeah, we really like to get behind them, provide them not only technology and tools and all of the kind of compliance harnessing they need to go to market at scale, but help them grow, help them maybe accelerate the development timelines, find more users. And so we're happy to provide grants basically for developers who we think we really can align with, and who are thinking about things the right way and have great sort of passion around the space. And we'll provide grants that are non-dilutive. They're also, there's no revenue share. We don't sort of, it's not an MG where we recoup, the goods in a lot of cases, or the value in a lot of cases. It's really just a subsidy to help accelerate development, grow the player base. When we think, there's real long-term value that will be created for the player communities at large in these spaces. And we think, over time, if our core thesis is right, that this is going to sort of grow the size of the games industry by an order of magnitude or more, we think there'll be all kinds of ways for us to monetize, or for the sort of businesses we create to monetize over time. Today, it's really about helping developers march up the learning curve, prove out what's really possible, and pull the future forward just as quickly as we can, so that these emergent ways to sort of monetize will reveal themselves over time.
Okay. I think that's a nice transition just to the ultimate vision for Forte. Today, you've got 11 million wallets. I think you guys have said publicly you've processed over $1 billion in GMV. You've got a pipeline that's very robust. I don't think you guys have said publicly, but tens of millions of MAU coming for blockchain gaming. What is the ultimate strategy and vision for Forte?
Yeah, so our strategy, like our vision, is really to enable publishers to give real property rights to players, to get these economies out for players, and ultimately to align very much with players and gamer communities and publishers around the world, and create open systems. We're opening up our platform more and more. We're doing so while making sure it's very secure and remains compliant. But we think ultimately, much like the internet, there'll sort of be open standards and protocols that anyone can plug into and participate in. We think there'll be tremendous value, trillions of dollars of value, created in that ecosystem over the next, sort of decade plus. And I think it might happen even faster than even we think today. And we think for us over time, there's a bunch of ways, again, for us to monetize and to build value over time. But today we're really focused on building, those core tools, those core enabling technologies to empower developers, empower players, empower game communities, to just make this stuff real, and actually kind of move away from a lot of the speculative stuff that happens in the crypto market today toward what we think are really sustainable economies that will create enduring value, which is what we're really interested in, and where I think, sort of the world is wide open for disruption and just tremendous value creation if developers really start to think about it and embrace it and do things right.
And just lastly, how do developers who are interested in evaluating Forte, how do they get in touch with you guys and evaluate the services offered?
Yeah, you can get in touch at just hello@forte.io. Get in touch with us, and you see more and more of what we're doing and the developers that we're working with in public. We just did a really cool sort of pre-sale with Wheelwright and the Gallium team for their new game that they're doing, Proxy, which we're really excited about. You'll see more of what we're doing over time. And in the meantime, just reach out at hello@forte.io.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, it was really fun to talk. Thanks.